Welcome to the Fogwood Files, where fog lingers among the trees and the forest holds its secrets close. The Canadian Maritimes are a land of silence and shadow, where pasts dissolve into mist and voices echo without a source. Here, beneath the canopy of pines, people have witnessed things they cannot explain. Their words remain as fragments of a larger mystery, stories carried through the woods like whispers in the dark. Tonight, we open one of those accounts and step deeper into the ledger of the strange.
Case File 003, Bigfoot Encounter. Date of encounter, November 12, 2001. Location, Charlotte County, New Brunswick. Date of report, December 2007.
I was 38 at the time of this encounter. I'd been hunting since I was a teenager, and most of what I knew about the woods came from my father and grandfather before me. Hunting was never just a sport for us. It was food on the table, an excuse to spend time in the woods, and a way of life you didn't question if you grew up in Charlotte County. That fall, deer season had been slower than usual. I worked construction out of St. George, but the company I was with had hit a lull in contracts. With the free time, I spent every chance I got in the woods. Part of it was practical, filling the freezer for winter, but if I'm honest, a bigger part of it was something else. I needed the stillness. The older I got, the more I craved it. Out there, away from phones, bills, and noise, the forest made sense in a way that life didn't. The stand I hunted from was one I built myself about 4 years earlier. Nothing fancy, just a wooden platform nestled 15 feet up an old maple at the edge of a game trail. From that vantage point, I could watch a natural funnel where deer crossed between two ridges. It had paid off before, and I trusted the spot. Charlotte County is thick country. Long ridges of spruce and fir, low valleys filled with cedar and alder, and old logging roads that seem to go nowhere. The air always has a damp bite to it in November, heavy with the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke from the scattered houses tucked in the distance. I never thought twice about being alone in those woods. If anything, solitude was a hunter's best ally. But after what I experienced that November morning, I've never stepped into those forests the same way again. That morning started like any other. I was up by 4:30, coffee steaming in the thermos, rifle slung over my shoulder. A thin frost glazed the windshield of my truck as the moon still hung pale over the ridges. By the time I parked off an old logging spur, the world was silent. My boots crunched softly over the frosted ground as I hiked in, the beam of my headlamp bouncing off the undergrowth. I reached the stand just before first light, climbing up and settling into the seat with the woods still cloaked in darkness. The pre-dawn forest is something you can't explain unless you've sat in it. Every sound feels magnified. The drip of condensation, the rustle of leaves, the shifting creak of trees. And yet, layered beneath it all, there's a patience to the silence, as if the land itself is holding back until the sun decides it's time to breathe again. At first light, the woods begin to stir. Chickadees flitted through the branches. A squirrel scolded somewhere to my right. I found myself relaxing into the rhythm, scanning the funnel trail below for the flicker of a tail or the flash of a white throat patch. For a while, it was everything a hunter hopes for. Stillness, patience, anticipation. But it didn't last. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It came faint at first, drifting through on the breeze. At first I thought maybe it was a skunk that had been hit on the road earlier, carried on the air currents, but it wasn't quite that. It was sharper, heavier, a sour mix of wet dog and musk layered with that distinct skunk stench, like it clung to fur that hadn't been clean in a long time. I wrinkled my nose and shifted on the stand, scanning the underbrush. The smell would fade, then return stronger, almost like it was circling, but nothing moved. Then, the woods went still. Not in a natural way, where things quiet for a few minutes. No, this was sudden. Birds stopped mid-chatter. The squirrel that had been raising hell earlier went silent. Even the breeze seemed to hold. The stillness pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. That was the first time the hair stood up on my neck. I couldn't explain why, but I felt watched. It wasn't long after that I heard it. A knock. A single sharp crack, like wood striking wood. It echoed faintly through the valley, then silence again. I froze, straining to listen. A minute later, another knock, further off, but distinct. I'd heard of hunters using antlers to rattle in deer, simulating bucks fighting. This wasn't that. It was deliberate, hollow, too controlled to be an accident. Then came the howl, low, drawn out, and unlike anything I had heard before. It wasn't a coyote, and it sure wasn't a wolf, both of which I could recognize without hesitation. This was deeper, more resonant. It rolled across the ridges and sank into my chest in a way that made me want to climb out of my own skin. After that howl, the woods didn't come back. No birds, no squirrels, no distant rustle of deer, just silence that felt wrong in a way that I can't explain. Shortly after, I heard the first branch snap. It came from behind me, deliberate and heavy, a sound of weight moving where no deer would tread so carelessly. Then another to the left, then another to the right. Always at a distance, but never retreating. It was moving around me in a slow circle. The smell returned, stronger. Wet dog and skunk, so thick I could taste it. My eyes watered, my throat tightened. I gripped the rifle harder, though I didn't raise it. I tried to tell myself it was a bear, maybe rooting through the undergrowth, but the footsteps betrayed it. They weren't the shuffling pads of an animal on four legs. They were paced, measured, like something walking upright, deliberately placing its weight where I could hear it. The minutes dragged like hours, the unseen steps pacing me in the stand. Every time I thought it had moved on, another crack or shuffle betrayed it on the opposite side. It was circling me. The game changed again when the first stone struck. It hit the trunk of a cedar 20 yards away with a heavy thunk. Too heavy to be an acorn, too solid to be a coincidence. Another followed, skittering through the branches above me. Then one struck the ground near the stand, landing with a dull thud. I held my breath, listening. My chest felt like it was in a vice. At the edge of my vision, something moved, a flash of dark fur between the trees. Gone as quick as it came, but tall, upright, moving in a way no deer, no bear, no moose ever moved. The smell grew unbearable, washing over me in waves. Every instinct screamed that something was closing in, testing, probing. I stayed frozen, afraid that any movement might trigger whatever it was to strike. My body ached from stillness, but I couldn't bring myself to shift. Hours stretched. The circling never ceased. As the first pale threads of dawn bled into the tree line, the woods around me changed again. The footsteps that had circled me through the early morning finally stilled. For a moment, I thought whatever haunted me had left. Then, at the far edge of the clearing, something shifted. It stepped from between the pines with deliberate weight, like it wanted me to hear it. My breath caught in my throat. At first, it seemed like a shadow breaking away from the trees, but then the outline resolved. Massive shoulders, thick limbs, and a shape far too tall to be any man. Its head nearly brushed a low-hanging branch as it paused in the open. The smell hit me stronger. Wet dog and skunk rolling over in waves so strong my stomach lurched. I gripped the edge of the stand until my knuckles ached, staring down at it. It didn't charge. It didn't flee. Instead, it began a slow, deliberate pacing, back and forth along the tree line, keeping its eyes on me the whole time. Each step was measured, like it wanted me to understand something. This was its ground, not mine. Then, it stopped, turned broadside, and with a sudden roar that split the still morning air, it tore a thick branch straight from a nearby sapling. The sound cracked like a gunshot. It held the splintered wood high, shook it, then flung it to the ground with enough force to rattle the dirt. The forest seemed to recoil at the noise, every living thing shrinking back. I felt it in my chest more than in my ears, a vibration that told me this was no bluff. This was a warning, a display of dominance. I sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe, convinced that if I so much as shifted my weight the wrong way, it would come for me. The creature's eyes, dark, heavy, glinting with something far more than animal instinct, locked with mine one last time. Then, just as suddenly as it had stepped into the open, it backed away, melting into the tree line until only the silence remained. For a long while after it vanished, I couldn't bring myself to move. The forest was silent, but it wasn't the natural quiet of dawn breaking. It was a heavy silence, the kind that presses down on you until every sound you make feels like a violation. I strained my ears for any sign of the retreating footsteps, but there was nothing. No crunch of undergrowth, no snapping of branches. It was as if the thing had dissolved into the mist itself. Minutes dragged into an hour. My legs began to cramp from holding still in the stand, yet I couldn't will myself to climb down. The memory of its roar, that violent display of power, still echoed in my ribs. Every so often the breeze would shift and a faint trace of wet dog and skunk would drift past, reminding me that it hadn't gone far. It was still out there, waiting. I kept telling myself to move when the light grew stronger. But each time I looked at that ladder, the thought of turning back on the tree line froze me in place. The forest felt alive with eyes. I imagined the thing standing just out of sight, watching, deciding whether I'd learned my lesson. By the time the sun finally broke clear above the trees, painting the clearing in pale gold, I was trembling from exhaustion. The birds hadn't returned, no squirrels rustled in the leaves, even the air felt hollow. It took everything I had in me to climb down, hands slipping slightly on the rungs from the sweat on my palms. Every creak of the ladder sounded like a gunshot to me, and I half expected the thing to charge the moment my feet touched the ground. But nothing came. Only the weight of the woods pressing in on all sides. I didn't bother unloading the stand or checking the trail for deer sign. I walked straight back to the logging road, each step quick and unsteady, glancing over my shoulder at every sound. The longer I walked, the more the forest seemed to close in, the pines crowding over the narrow path as if they meant to swallow me whole. When I finally reached the truck, I fumbled the keys twice before managing to unlock the door. Even once the engine started and gravel spit under my tires, I didn't feel safe. Not until the trees finally gave way to open fields did I breathe properly again. But even then, I knew the silence of that forest and the thing that owned it would never leave me. 2 days later, I returned with a friend to retrieve the stand. I didn't want to go back, but leaving it there felt even worse. At the base of the maple, we found impressions in the damp earth. They weren't boots, and they weren't bare. They were footprints. Unmistakable footprints, but far too large to belong to any man. Each print was broad with a distinct heel, arch, and 5 toes pressed clearly into the soil. The stride between them stretched nearly 4 feet, longer than I could even imagine if it were to take a leap. I crouched over one of them, laying my hand flat inside. My fingers didn't even reach the halfway mark across the ball of the foot. It was human in shape, but monstrous in scale, as if something walked the earth that was both human and inhuman. The smell lingered faintly in the hollow, that same reek of wet dog and skunk clinging to the damp air. My friend tried to laugh it off, muttering something about tricks of the mud or maybe a hunter with big boots. But he didn't meet my eyes when he said that. He knew as well as I did, boots don't have toe marks. I haven't hunted that ridge again. I still hunt, but never alone, and never without glancing over my shoulder more than I care to admit. Whatever I saw, whatever circled me, tested me, and let me walk away, it left its proof in the ground. And I'll tell you this, the woods of Charlotte County, they're not empty. They're not ours alone. Something else walks in them, something that looks just enough like us to remind you that it could be, but it isn't. End of report.
This report submitted by the Fogwood Files, another account pulled from the fog and preserved in the records. If you'd like the next story to find its way to you, be sure to like and subscribe so you'll be here when the next fire is lit. Until then, stay close to the firelight, because in the woods, you're never truly alone, and something is always waiting just beyond the glow.